Welcome to the Chase and Big Joe show on 1025, 1063. The Game. I am neither Chase McCabe nor Big Joe Dubin. I am Adam Vingan. Nick Keyser is here. Nick Frazier is here. The Knicks are here. I hope everybody had a wonderful July 4th weekend, an extended weekend. Nick,
Hey,
Keyser, how are you doing?
I am
I'm going to have to
fabulous.
differentiate today.
Dr. Crane. There you
Dr.
go.
Crane,
That's
that's
what the
Dr.
right.
Crane,
moniker
that's
is.
right.
So go ahead.
We had the speaker for about a week there. Then now Dr. Crane's back in the house. And then you had the Knicks at night is what we used to be when we ran Preds games, Adam. So we have a lot of variations to what to be called. But yeah, riding the ship this summer and filling in for the two Yahoos that are in this time slot's going to be fun.
Yeah, Chase is on vacation. Big Joe Dubin is helping fill in for Jared this week, who is also on vacation. It'll be Big Joe and Jill Jelnick, I believe, from 2 to 6 today and tomorrow, and me and Big Joe Dubin on Wednesday and Thursday from 2 to 6.
Wow.
So, but I'm happy to be back. I've now been on every show as a fill-in over the past 5 weeks. This was the last one I had yet to conquer.
The bucket list.
Yeah. Now I can check this one off. I'm really excited to be here. And speaking of excitement, 1 week ago today was the start of NHL free agency. NHL owners spent more than I think it was $1.2 billion.
I think so.
In total contracts and free agency. It was a crazy spending day. Yes, it was more than $1.2 billion in contracts handed out on free agency day in the NHL last Monday, July 1st. But of course, the Predators, were the big, did the big moves. They had the big moves. They signed Steven Stamkos. They signed Jonathan Marchessault. They signed Brady Shea. The Predators were the talk of the NHL last Monday and throughout the week. Winners and losers, Predators, big winners in free agency. Now, we all know that what happens on free agency day does not always translate onto the ice, but people believe the Predators have improved dramatically, so much so that on ESPN Bet, the Predators' Stanley Cup odds went from 35 to 1 to 18 to 1 as a result of the moves they made in free agency. So I think that puts them in the top 10 in terms of betting odds for the Stanley Cup. I have to go back and look that up, but a huge jump from 35 to 1 to 18 to 1 as a result of those moves. So I was thinking about this over the weekend. We talked a little bit about it last week, or a lot about it last week, because it was the story of the week. And I would love to hear from Predators fans. Our text line is still down, but unfortunately, but you can call 615-737-1025. We have our YouTube chat on the stream. You can also weigh in there. I want to know from Predators fans where the excitement level is for this team, which does not take the ice for another 3 months for a meaningful game. And when was the last time you were this amped for a Predator season? Because there's going to be a lot of hype about this Predators team. Nick, when you think back to a week ago, the moves the Predators made, acquiring a future Hall of Famer and Steven Stamkos, a recent Conn Smythe Trophy winner and Jonathan Marchessault, and a solid, Brady Shea on his own, like if that was the big move, that's still a big move. Brady Shea is a top 4 caliber defenseman in the NHL, but he has taken, he's at the bottom of the list compared to the other two. Like, where do you feel like the excitement level is? You interact with the fans. You're a man of the people.
Yeah.
What do you think what are people saying about this Predators team after what happened a week ago?
Well, I think from just kind of gathering thoughts from amongst all the shows, or whether it be on social media, there's been a lot more hype than previous years. I would say maybe since 2016-17 for that team that made it that far. That team was not built the same way whatsoever. And then Robbie and Joe have kind of talked about how that 19 team was a deeper team on paper, but obviously disappointed in the postseason. I think the excitement is through the roof. I think in all of my years of watching and covering this team, it's at an all-time high. And it's no shock to anybody that would be the case. But after Monday, I have never seen so many fans come out of the woods of, oh my God, they got Steven Stamkos and this guy, Jonathan Marchessault, and who's Brady Shea? And Chance the Rapper gifts were everywhere. but that was so cool to see. I think just from an outside perspective looking in from watching that team growing up, people were so excited. They've not been this excited, I think, ever. There's been some moments that have been similar for sure. I think back to when I was a senior in high school, not to date anybody by a
Too late.
large margin.
When were you a senior in high school? What year?
2016,
Oh my
17.
God.
Yeah. So, but the year before that was when it was the offseason going into that season. PK Subban was traded to Nashville. And I remember working out, getting ready for my own hockey season because I was still playing at the time and being, phoned by my family that there was a photo of me, my cousin, and PK floating around after the trade had been made. So the excitement level from that, I think, levels to what I have felt in the last week or so. So that's where it gauges for me, Adam. And I think it's through the roof and it should be through the roof. And I think it's very interesting to see that both the Titans and the Predators have spent so much money. And I shared with Robbie and Joe this morning that it was $336 million spent by both teams combined this offseason.
That's impressive. And you touched on, for me, for frame of reference, I moved to Nashville in March of 2015. So 3/4 of the way through the 2014-15 season, Peter Laviolette's first season behind the bench. And the only comparison I can make to what this excitement feels like is what you mentioned, Nick, the acquisition of PK Subban in the summer of 2016. There was so much excitement about PK Subban. I remember he came here. He went on the, I think, went to Tootsie's, I think it was,
Yes,
and
that's right.
sang Folsom Prison Blues. Is that right?
And
Yeah.
he did that and he went on the bridge too. So
Yeah. So there was a lot of excitement about PK Subban, and that's how people are feeling about Steven Stamkos. I said this with Robbie last week, that there are people who are just Steven Stamkos fans. Like there were people who were PK Subban fans who by extension became Predators fans because Subban played for them. I could see a lot of that happening with Stamkos. And there's just name recognition. I mean, Steven Stamkos, even if you are a casual fan of the NHL, you know who Steven Stamkos is. He's been in the league for 16 years. He's one of the best goal scorers of his generation. He is a captain who has won the Stanley Cup twice. By all accounts, a really good citizen. So there's a lot of excitement about that, and I think when you see how much money the Predators spent, and the fact that Barry Trotz has shown in his short time as an NHL general manager that he's not afraid to make the bold decision. I mean, it's not just what he did in free agency this summer. I mean, last summer wasn't as bold with Ryan O'Reilly, Gus Nyquist, and Luke Shen, but it did come out of nowhere. I mean, I remember thinking those moves were counterintuitive. I thought this team was going to take a step back, but Barry Trotz doesn't believe in that. And even before that free agency, trading Ryan Johansson, buying out Matt Duchene. I mean, Barry Trotz quickly has put his stamp on this franchise, and I can understand the excitement. And I would love to hear from our listeners. Again, our text line is not operational currently. Hopefully, it will be rectified this week. But we have the good old fashioned phone line, 615-737-1025. Our YouTube chat is up. We'll monitor the YouTube chat closely. I want to know where the excitement level is among Predators fans today, and when the last time you were this amped up for a Predators season. But the question I want to ask, and we'll get into this next, is it's okay to be excited. I mean, that's the point of being a fan, right? You are a fanatic. You want to be excited. But then we're talking about expectations. The expectations for this team are now through the roof. As I said, betting odds on ESPN Bet went from 35-1 to 18-1 as a result of the moves that the Predators made in free agency. But what should the expectation be? What is the baseline for success? I laid out my baseline for success last week on Robbie and Rex Road. I'll share it again. I want to get Nick's thoughts on it as well. Chase and Big Joe show. Adam Vingan and Nick Keyser in for Chase and Big Joe here on ESPN 1025, 1063, The Game. Chase and Big Joe show here on 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Adam Vingan, Nick Teaser in for Chase and Big Joe. Chase is on vacation. Big Joe switching time slots this week. He'll be helping fill in for Jared while Jared is on vacation. Monday and Tuesday, Big Joe will be with Jill Jelnick of Fox 17. And on Wednesday and Thursday, Big Joe will be with me. So I'm looking forward to doing a couple of shows with Big Joe. That'll be fun. But before the break, we were talking about the excitement level around this Predators season. And with that comes heightened expectations. Now, last week when I was sitting in with Robbie and you, Nick, on the morning show, I laid out my baseline for a successful Predators season. Because with the moves that the Predators have made, I feel like they have a limited window. 2 to 3 years. I'm closer to 2 years. I mean, I can be convinced of 3, but I think it's closer to 2. Considering the age of the players that the Predators acquired and, making sure you maximize their effectiveness because Steven Stamkos is 34, Marchessault is 33, and Shea is 30. On top of Roman Josi being in his mid-30s and Philip Forsberg has a little bit more time and he's in his late 20s, or is he 30 now?
Probably about to be 30, I think. I think he's 29, maybe.
I feel like he's got a summer birthday. Either way, they have an older team. Now, last I checked, last week before the holiday, the Predators, by average age, were the second oldest team in the NHL. The only team older than the Predators is the Pittsburgh Penguins, with Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, and the like. Now, those players won multiple championships,
right,
so it's okay that they're old.
Kind of like a nursing home, but not that, but not by that much.
No, but at this point, we've talked about this with other teams like the Chicago Blackhawks, with the Los Angeles Kings. You can mention it with the Penguins as well because they've missed the playoffs for a couple of years now after making it 15, 16 years in a row, basically. You'll take the downturn if you have a championship to remember.
No doubt.
The Predators obviously haven't had that yet. So this was my baseline for success for the Predators. It's twofold. One, they have to finish in at least the top 2 in their division, which means they have home ice advantage in at least the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, if they advance and they face the number 1 seed and they're the road team, that's fine. But they have to finish at least top 2 in their division and have home ice advantage in the first round. And this was my second part, which, by the way, Jared later texted me that it was a hot take. Now, if Jared is saying something is a hot take, then it's a scorching hot take.
Well,
like third-degree burns if you touch this take, according to Jared. I think they have to make it to at least the Western Conference Final. I don't think winning a round, even though they haven't won a playoff round since 2018, I don't think winning a playoff round is enough. Quite frankly, I don't think winning 2 playoff rounds is enough. This is an all-in team. And because of the limited window you have look, Steven Stamkos, by the time he's in the final year of his contract, he's probably not going to be the Steven Stamkos we know. Ryan O'Reilly is an older player. Same with Marchessault. He's probably not going to be the player that he has been near the end of that contract. And, Roman Josi is still in the lead player. Philip Forsberg has emerged, as an elite level player. There is a limited window to get this done if you're the Predator. So that's my expectation baseline. Finishing top 2 in the division and getting to at least the Western Conference Final. Nick Teaser, am I out of my mind for having those expectations?
Adam, I don't think you are out of your mind. I think you're in your right mind for thinking that way. And here's a way to look at it from my perspective, but also the contracts in front of us as well. You've got obviously long-term. We talked about Brady Shea 7x7. That might be too long, but that's the price on the market. But looking at everything on its face, you've got about 3 years of this entire core staying together. So that's including even having a guy like Tommy Novak here for the next 3 years, by the way. And then after that, you're looking at, okay, where do some newer faces fit in at some point? Because while the Predators want to be good at them, they also want to kind of, integrate, these prospects like a Joakim Kimmel, Zach LaRue, Spencer Stas, he's coming up this year. You've also got, some other guys drafted on defense. What does Tanner Molendyk look like in 2 seasons? So you have to think about the upcoming pieces and how they could possibly contribute. But it's also the lack of experience too. And this is a very experienced group. I'd like to even look at the playoff numbers, games played, to see what they look like now, maybe in the ranking system as well. But I mean, that doesn't matter too much yet because they have to actually get there. Reason being for laying that out, if they can't do it in 3 years, then you're kind of resetting once again from what you had at the beginning of Trotz's era in Nashville. And you're not going to look the same. Ryan O'Reilly is going to be, 36 years old. And then you've also got Gus Nyquist is going to be long gone by then, more than likely. I mean, Colton Sissons will be in his mid 30s by that point. So that's another depth piece that you won't have. Stamkos, like you just laid out earlier, along with Jonathan Marchessault. I don't think they're going to be the same players, come the next 2 seasons. You've got to get it done in that time frame. If you don't, you're not going to be able to be a championship caliber team. And that's a fair question that we asked this morning too on Robbie and Rexroad. Is this a cup contending team right now? And I tend to lean yes, but if they don't do it in the next couple of years, then you're kind of having to reset your window. So those are my stakes. I think I agree with what you had to lay out. Western Conference Final, I do think Jared's right. That's a pretty big hot take.
Well, when you put that much money into these players and they're older players, and you only have a limited window with those players being effective, I think Barry Trotz has demonstrated that he thinks this Predators team is close to, and I think to make good on that, they have to strike quickly because, as you said, Nick, once these contracts get, once they get further along, if the Predators don't win, it might be a little bit rough. This is, kudos to Barry Trotz. He has turned this team around more quickly than I anticipated, and perhaps more quickly than I would have liked, which is a weird thing to say. But I've always been of the mind of this team is not going to get better until it allows itself to get worse. And and clearly Barry Trotz does not think that way, and I can't begrudge him for that. But I always felt like, especially near the end of the David Poile era, it was time to take a real step back. Not like maybe we'll sneak into the playoff step back, like a team that for most of the season is not going to make the playoffs,
right,
in order to get the type of game changer that is typically available at the top of the draft. But if you want to just talk about their division, where they stand in the pecking order of the Central Division, we can look at the teams that finished ahead of them: Dallas, Winnipeg, and Colorado. Dallas lost a lot of their defense this summer.
I don't think they're going to be the same team.
Yeah, Chris Tanev they traded his rights to the Maple Leafs, and the Maple Leafs signed him. I'm trying to think who else they lost on the back end. They bought out Ryan Suter, which
they
is probably
lost Hakanpää.
They lost Yanni Hakanpää. Suter's probably addition by subtraction.
I think so too.
They re-signed Matt Duchene.
Yep,
but they still have a really solid forward group, a really deep team. I believe they had 8 players who scored 20 goals last year.
That sounds about right.
They've got Wyatt Johnston, who looks like a stud at a young age. Logan Stankoven, who looks like he could be a really special player. Jason Robertson is still a young player. I still think Dallas has a good team.
Yes, they are.
Winnipeg is interesting. They didn't really do much this offseason either. They lost Sean Monahan, who was a really good fit for them. They traded for him about halfway through the season from Montreal. Was a really good fit as their, I believe, second line center. Yeah. He leaves in free agency for Columbus, of all places.
He's back with Johnny Gaudreau.
Yes, back when they were with the Flames together. But as long as you have Connor Hellebuck, you have a chance.
Yes, you do.
But you saw what happened to the Jets in the playoffs, which was not pretty. They were absolutely bludgeoned by the Avalanche. And the Avalanche, I think they've got some cap issues. They re-signed Jonathan Drouin. They lost Sean Walker, who they acquired at the trade deadline. I think he went to Carolina. The Valerie Nichushkin,
that's a weird situation
hangs over everything because he's been a really good player for them. But again, as long as you have Makar and McKinnon,
it's possible.
Anything is possible. But I mean, to me, of those 3 teams, I think the one team that I would say today is the favorite to win the Central Division is probably the Dallas Stars.
I would say so.
I think Winnipeg's going to take a step back. I think the Predators could be head to head with Colorado because Colorado does have more elite talent than Nashville. But I do think that Nashville, the additions that the Predators made to their group makes them maybe a little bit deeper. Colorado has sort of lived off being a one-line team for a while, and it's worked. Hey, they won the Stanley Cup, right? Like
They were deep, yeah.
they were deep then. But to me, a top 2 finish in the Central Division and a trip to the Western Conference Final, in my opinion, is not too much to ask, especially because of making sure that you take advantage of the things that you did last week.
And I don't think it's too far of a stretch to think that way, Adam. And if you're a Predators fan, you shouldn't be selling yourself short of that idea either. And the reason being is if this is a group that is kind of, they've been superstars in their own right, in their own category. If they can continue to be that this year, if not better, because look at the rejuvenation Gus Nyquist had all of a sudden, along with Ryan O'Reilly. If you get some sort of conglomeration of that this season, they could be a really dangerous team. And I don't know if we're going to see, multiple 40 goal scorers. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, if it does, I would maybe put Steven Stamkos and Philip Forsberg in that category. I don't think anybody else would do it on this team. The power play also has to lead them down that way in the playoffs. That's going to be the biggest question mark. Is if they can actually, fulfill that destiny that they've long hoped and dreamed of for the last basically 5 years, I would beg to say. But they've also struggled to win playoff games at home. So how can they recapture the Bridgestone magic, I guess? So we'll find out if they're able to do that or not. I think Andrew Brunette is pretty psyched to have them. I saw him at the prospect showcase, and he was ecstatic when I asked him about that really quickly. So that's going to be a good mix to see how the Predators can handle that with even a new assistant coach here. How do they adjust and get ready for a long run like that, especially with some veterans? And what is that going to look like in the locker room? And how are the young guys going to get involved in the same breath? And to their credit, they stayed healthy last year too. And can they do that again? So we'll find out, Adam. And I think in the Central, really quickly, it's going to be interesting to see how Colorado does. For me, I think they're a very key component. If the Preds can finish second, I think it's necessary for them to get home ice advantage. But if Colorado, if they're at all struggling and Nashville takes advantage of those games in the Central, that's huge. And last year, I thought they did their fair share of winning those games. Kevin Lankinen stole some games last year too. So, and he still does not have a home, by the way. Nothing to report there, but
Yeah, kind of surprising, to be honest with you.
yeah, kind of followed up there a few different times. But the Predators have to handle those games in order to get to that point. So, question is, can they do it with this new staff, and can they do it with the players they've added? It's a lot of fun to kind of speculate on.
I'll add a third thing to my baseline, as you mentioned it. Win a home playoff game, which they have not done since 2021.
That's
They have
wild to
lost
think about.
6 consecutive home playoff games after losing in the first round.
Is that the longest streak in the NHL currently?
I would have to look that up, but it wouldn't
bet
shock
it
me if
is.
it was. But they winning a home playoff game would be a nice touch, considering
Yes,
it
it
hasn't
would be.
happened in 3 years. But we talked about the Predators making big splashes in free agency. We've mentioned the names, but could they have made an even bigger splash? One prominent Predators player reportedly made a push behind the scenes, and we'll get into that next on the Chase and Big Joe show. Big Joe show. I don't know how Chase does that every
Big
day.
words.
Big Joe show. Adam Vingan, Nick Keyser in for Chase and Big Joe on 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Chase and Big Joe Show, sponsored by Omni National Hotel. Adam Vingan, Nick Keyser in for Chase and Big Joe. I'm gonna say Big Show. Chase and Big Show.
It's a tongue twister, Adam.
It's all right.
Chase and Big Show. I mean, Chase would love that. Wrestling fan, Big Show, Paul White. He would love that. Chase and the Big Show, the Big Show show.
Yes, he would.
1025-1063, the game.
Big Joe and Big Show both have a goatee little action going on there.
Oh, so?
it's possible.
Okay.
I feel like Big Joe could have been a professional wrestler at one point in his
In his
life.
heyday.
I think he is. He just doesn't tell
He's
us.
a very charismatic individual. Probably wrestles under a mask like Nacho Libre. Probably, maybe he is.
Nacho.
We can check him out on the Mexican wrestling scene.
Just
but
don't throw some corn in someone's eye.
No, don't do that. But
He might
So-
be a luchador. We'll find out.
yeah, we can ask him. Find out at 2:00. So we talked about all the big splashes that the Predators have made in free agency. Steven Stamkos is here. Jonathan Marchessault is here. Brady Shea is here. But could there have been a different big splash by the Predators in the offseason? I saw this late last week during our time off from the air from Nick Kyprios. So to set the scene here, Nick Kyprios is a prominent voice in the hockey media based in Toronto, was an NHL insider for Sportsnet for a long time, continues to host a radio show on Sportsnet with Justin Bourne in Toronto. Very good show. And he wrote a column for the Toronto Star newspaper, one of the major newspapers in the city, where he spills his book. It's not 32 Thoughts by Elliot Freeman, but it's he is well connected.
It's a good version, just like David as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Nick Kyprios is well connected. So he had a column that came out last week, said this Maple Leafs offseason is off to a start. There's a long way to go to conquer the Atlantic. And you might be thinking to yourself, why does that matter? Why does what the Maple Leafs do in the offseason matter when it comes to the Predators? Well, if you scroll down a little bit in this column, at the end of every column, he has a section called Kipper's Corner, where he has a lot of just nuggets that don't fit into a full column. And the first nugget he has from his most recent column is this, quote, prior to the Predators spending a whack of dough on free agents, Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea, ex-Leaf Ryan O'Reilly did his very best to convince GM Barry Trotz to make a push and trade for Mitch Marner. So according to Nick Kyprios, before the Predators spent all of that money on those free agents, Ryan O'Reilly, who of course spent part of the 2022-23 season with the Maple Leafs after, he left the Blues at the trade deadline and went to before signing with the Predators. Ryan O'Reilly, according to Nick Kyprios, did his very best to convince Barry Trotz to make a push and trade for Mitch Marner. So the simple question is, did the Predators dodge a bullet by signing Stamkos, Marchessault, and Shea instead of trading for Mitch Marner? Now, we talked a lot about Marner on this show and others on this station for weeks when the Predators had all of that cap space and we were expecting them. And a lot of people connected the dots between Marner and the Predators because the Predators had all that cap space to accommodate Marner's immense contract. And he's going to need her contract because this is the final season of his contract. And, Mitch Marner has a full no movement clause in his, so he would have say over whatever destination he goes. It's all up to him. I mean, Leafs can do whatever they can to trade him, but he has every contractual right to say, no, I'm not doing that. And it certainly seems like they're going to have a really hard time trading him.
They really are. Yeah.
So my first thought is what I like about the signings of Stamkos, Marchessault, and Shea is that you did not have to give up any assets to acquire them other than cap space. You had to sign them to big contracts, but you didn't have to give up any roster players. You didn't have to give up any draft picks or anything like that, any prospects. You just had to give them the money. Marner, that would not happen. Now, a lot of times the Marner to Predators trade pipeline always involved UC Saros because the Leafs need a goalie. But Saros re-signing in Nashville took that off the table. But just the idea that Ryan O'Reilly, according to Nick Kyprios, tried his best to convince Barry Trotz to make a push and trade for Mitch Marner. Did the Predators dodge a bullet by doing what they did instead of what Ryan O'Reilly reportedly tried to get them to do?
Yeah. I think it's a really well worth, thought out thing that Kyprios put out. That's the third Nick introduced to our show already this morning. So many Knicks, not me whatsoever. But I think they did dodge a bullet, Adam. I think I've seen a lot of people talk about how Mitch Marner could be asking for over $12 million on his next contract. I don't know if the Predators would be willing to dish out that much dough, as Kiprios put it in his column at the very end there in his nugget. I don't think he would be a skater that I do think it's tough. The more I've thought about it, I'm a little bit, I don't know if I want to really go down the way of saying that it would be like a rabbit hole of wondering if the money would be worth it. That's just where my mind has been going to. I don't know. He's not been the most flashy guy, and that's okay. You don't have to be flashy to be a stellar player in the National Hockey League. But does he fit the mold of being a Predator? And I don't know why he and Matt Duchene come to mind for me, but they kind of remind me a little bit of each other. I think of the style of play somewhat. They're not both, centermen, but they do play wing really well. If the Predators went and got Mitch Marner, I feel like there's been times where he's been hurt and he's missed some significant time, but not, a whole lot of times throughout his entire career. For him to come to Nashville, I mean, if you want to bring him in, like I said, it's dishing out more dough. And I don't know if the Predators would be willing to do that. But Barry Trotz clearly showed that spending $110 million in a blink of an eye in half an hour, he was okay with doing that. And could Mitch Marner have been part of that future plan for them? I don't know if I'd be interested in him, honestly, Adam. I think just because it's more questions than answers that you would be getting with him. And also, what type of demeanor is he going to end up having? At some point, you want to make a good impression with him when he gets here. But, it's when that wears off, what does that look like when he's here in Nashville long term? That's where I'm left with is I just feel like there's more questions with him. What's he going to look like? He's a little bit younger, which is good.
That would be the key for me.
Yeah.
He is the youngest of the play. Like when you include the ages of the players they signed in free agency, he just turned 27. I think he's a fresh 27. He turned 27 and his contract has one more year on it with a 10.903 million cap hit. And it's going to be even bigger on his next deal. And Marner, the reason why I was always kind of iffy on Marner as fit for the Predators was because he can't score goals. I mean, he had 20 goals this past season, 30 the year before, 35 the year before that. But he's more of a playmaker than a scorer. And now that can help you score. Like if you put Marner on the line with Philip Forsberg's probably going to score a few more goals. So that helps. But the thing for me is with Stamkos and Marchessault specifically, they are scorers first and foremost. They are directly responsible for putting the puck in the net. Now Marner can do that, but that's not his primary skill. But he is an immensely talented player. I would say, one of the best defensive forwards in the league, was a Selke Trophy finalist, not this past season, but the season before, if I'm not mistaken. Really good player. I think there is a perception of him. You mentioned Matt Duchene. I think there is a perception of him as a Matt Duchene-like presence. I think one thing that also doesn't help Marner is that his playoff numbers, just looking at pure points, are impressive. He has 50 points in 57 career playoff games, 11 goals, 39 assists, 50 points in 57 games. But anecdotally, he tends to disappear in the postseason. And that was evident this past postseason when the Leafs lost in 7 games in the first round to the Boston Bruins. Austin Matthews missed some games. William Nylander missed some games. And Marner did not raise his game to make up for his injured teammates. But I thought that was very interesting by Nick Kiprios to stick that in there. And Kiprios is well connected. I mean, I don't think this is hey, I'm throwing something at the wall and hoping it gets clicks. Like Kiprios knows the market. He knows people connected to Marner and the Leafs. I think it's interesting that O'Reilly, according to him, that O'Reilly was the one doing that, considering that they weren't teammates for very long.
Yeah, exactly.
But
which is kind of going back to, the question he got asked last year at the very outset of the regular season was, what spoiled your time in Toronto? Why'd you not want to re-sign? Like that got asked constantly. So, how much of an impression did Marner make on him? Clearly, reportedly enough, it's one to where Ryan O'Reilly would have liked him to have joined the Nashville Predators. And part of me wonders too, Adam, let's say Barry Trotz thought about adding him. You could trade Gus Nyquist at the draft. You could trade him somewhere and get a draft pick, a depth piece or something, replace a Kiefer Sherwood or something like that, right? And then you could go, okay, we have this wing, like this wing hole open. What does this do for us long term? Could Marner have been a fit there? Sure, absolutely. But the question is, I'd like to even know what Barry's perception is. I remember Alex Doherty from the Tennessean asked Barry the day that McDonough got traded, and I was standing next to him, there's been some rumors about, a guy like Mitch Marner is out there. And, Barry's eyes brightened up and he kind of shot down the idea rather quickly and was not big about that idea. But I could tell when his name was said, Marner, his eyes lit up and I was like, wonder what Barry is cooking. Because I knew he was thinking of something and he didn't say it then, but I knew he was thinking it then, clearly because he said it a few days ago. He told leadership he was going to replace that hole of McDonough leaving. Now, does Marner do that for this team? I don't know if he really does or not. He was part of that leadership team in Toronto, Adam, but how much of a leader would he be in Nashville? Is that the type of guy they're looking based on those player connections? That's a question left to be seen.
615-737-1025, our text, and unfortunately is not working still. Hopefully will be rectified this week, but you can call us. You can chat with us on YouTube chat. We do have some chats in the YouTube chat that we'll get to, but would love to hear your thoughts. Did the Predators dodge a bullet by choosing to sign Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea instead of reportedly making a push for Mitch Marner at the behest of Ryan O'Reilly? We'll get into that next. Chase and Big Joe show. There, I got it that time. Adam Vingan, Nick Keyser in. ESPN 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
All right, let's talk 5 Points Roofing. Now's a good time. It's pretty right now. Now's a good time to get your roof checked out. They will come out there and give you a free inspection and then tell you what you need. 5pointsroofing.com. That's where you need to go to get started. If you were affected, your property was affected, maybe a month or so ago by big storms that came through, your roof probably got some damage. So have them come out, look at it, and then if you do need repairs, they will walk you through the insurance claim process and make the process so much easier. 5pointsroofing.com, Five pointsroofing.com. You got to spell it out. 5pointsroofing.com. Go see them.
Chasing Big Joe show on ESPN 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Adam Vingan, who is actually working with a 12-year-old, Nick Keyser.
Not really.
You said you were a senior in high school in 2016?
2017 was graduation. Yeah.
Oh, my God. I graduated from college in 2011,
Wow.
and you graduated high school in 2000. Oh, my God.
And I just got married this summer.
Frazier, how old are you?
Same age.
Jeez.
But you know what, Adam?
You seem more like an old soul than he does.
Yes.
Frazier is more of an old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still read the paper.
That's good. It's good. I love the feel of the paper. You still need to pick up the actual paper.
Well, I
Still
did the
look at the
same in
comics.
college. Yeah.
Got to look at the comics, Adam. Can't go missing the comics.
You guys
section.
mentioned that you did what? You were the Knicks at night. Neither of you were like alive for like Nick at Night.
Yeah,
when
we
Nick
were.
At Night was a
They
thing.
still did that. Yeah.
They did?
Yeah.
Oh man,
I watched it.
It goes on the latter years, obviously.
Nickelodeon was around.
well, of course, Nickelodeon was around. The better question is, what were they showing on Nick at Night? Like what shows?
Full House.
Yeah, Full
See,
House.
like when I was young, Nick at Night was like I Love Lucy and I
Mhm.
Dream of Jeannie, like actual old shows. Like
Okay.
Now those are on MeTV
oh, I don't even know what that is.
and Pluto TV.
I still don't know what that is.
I saw it was Full House, and then it became Fresh Prince of Bel Air. Do you remember that, Frazier?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Will
Oh,
Smith
my
for
God.
sure.
The youth of today. Speaking of youth, Mitch Marner, 27. He's still young.
Yeah.
We were talking about how, according to a report from Nick Kiprios in the Toronto Star, Ryan O'Reilly made a push for Barry Trotz to try and acquire Mitch Marner before YouTube chat is working. And I think it's Raji and friends. I hope it's Raji. Is it Roji? Raji?
I would say Raji.
Okay, Raji. Raji says this about Marner. The guy is a stud. He'd help and even be a potential franchise player in terms of his skill at the game. But in terms of long-term growth, Barry made the right decision in terms of leadership with the signings.
Yep.
The other question is, could Marner be good without Nylander and Matthews? Now, I am confident that Mitch Marner could still be an effective player
Mm-hmm.
without Austin Matthews and William Nylander. I remember when the Carolina Hurricanes acquired Jake Gensel at the trade deadline, who, by the way, has signed with the Lightning to replace Steven Stamkos. When Gensel was traded to the Hurricanes, there was a lot of talk about whether or not he would be an effective player without Sidney Crosby. And I think he answered that loud and clear. I
Yep.
think he was the Hurricanes' leading scorer from the time he joined the team through the end of the playoffs. So I'm not worried about Marner in that case, but it does come down to the leadership aspect. Because one thing we know about Barry Trotz, he loves himself some serial winners. He had it in McDonough. He traded McDonough, obviously, but he got it in O'Reilly. He got it in Nyquist. He got it in Shen. Now, he also has serial winners on his roster. I would consider Roman Josi, although the fact he has not won the Stanley Cup, I would consider Roman Josi a strong leader. I would say the same about Philip Forsberg. So you lose McDonough, but you add Stamkos, who has won the Stanley Cup twice. You add Marchessault, who won the Stanley Cup 2 years ago, was the Conn Smythe winner. Well, it was actually one calendar year ago,
Yes,
two
yes.
seasons ago. And Brady Shea, is a mainstay in the Stanley Cup playoffs with the Hurricanes. And before that, the Rangers. Like, they've all been around. They all know what it takes to win or come close to winning. And that's the issue with Marner, I think, for a lot of people, is that group in Toronto, that Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares group, has won one playoff round. They beat Tampa Bay Lightning 2 seasons ago.
Yep.
Before losing to the Panthers in the second round. This past season, they were down 3-1 in their series to the Boston Bruins, forced a Game 7, lost Game 7 in overtime, if I'm not mistaken,
I think it was.
to David Pastrnak and the Bruins. So that team hasn't won a lot in the postseason. Now, they've won a lot in the regular season, and they put up a lot of big numbers individually in the regular season. But would I consider Marner on the same level as a leader of those players? No, I would not.
Mm-mm.
And I think that is a key distinction in the types of players that Barry Trotz has brought in. Now, not every player on your team can be a quote unquote serial winner.
No.
As I said to Robbie last week, and I think I've definitely said it to you, Nick. I've said it to many people. I said it to Willie a couple weeks ago. Not every player on your team needs to be well-rounded.
No.
If you have a player who's an elite at one thing, like look at Steven Stamkos, for example. Steven Stamkos, at this point in his career, at 34 years old, 16 years into the league, he is I would say, and this is not meant to be insulting, a rather one-dimensional player, but he is elite at the one dimension,
Yes, he
scoring
is.
goals. And that's okay. Like, does Steven Stamkos need to back check like Sasha Barkov? No, he does not, because he's good at one thing the Predators have struggled to do, and that's score goals.
That's right.
So if Marner, he is, in terms of point producing, he's up there. One of the top point producers in the league since he broke into the NHL. But is he the kind of personality that you want in your dressing room? I think the fact that Barry Trotz took Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene out of that dressing room, I think speaks volumes about what he's looking for. And just based on what I've seen from afar, I've never covered Mitch Marner. I don't know Mitch Marner, but from what I've seen from afar, it seems, emphasis on seems, like he would fit more into the Duchene mold, as you said, than the O'Reilly, Stamkos, Marchessault mold.
The way that I want to weigh this too is, what type of player does Barry Trotz want his younger players to look up to? And we've kind of already touched on that briefly. But the way I think about it is this, and I'm going to draw on a trip I took in March to go watch a prospect for the Predators and Joakim Kimmel. So Kimmel is also, I wouldn't say one-dimensional, Adam, but what I did notice in person after seeing it on film, he's got one hell of a slap shot from the exact same point as Steven Stamkos. The way I look at it is, in this example, is if you have a Steven Stamkos now in Nashville, a two-time Maurice Richard winner, by the way, he won it when he was 19 and he won it when he was 21 years old.
And that's the goal scoring championship,
Yes,
by the way.
the goal scoring championship. That's right. That's impressive. And if you've got a guy that is still continuously scoring 20 to 30 goals, he's gotten to 30 goals easily the last 3 seasons. And if he's doing that at 31 through 33, now about to be 30, or he is 34 now, that's impressive. And to be, like you said, one-dimensional in that way, but he is elite in that category. I mean, aside from Ovechkin, I wouldn't want to go up against anybody else in that circle. Alex Carrier and Jeremy Lauzon told me that last year. They're like, we don't like blocking those shots. Those are the least ones that we look forward to actually going for. And how can Steven Stamkos, kind of be this model for what these guys that are coming up, how can he be that for them? And that's the way I look at it. Marner is not going to be someone, like you said, and I've heard the same things. He's not going to be someone that is a model necessarily for these guys. It's kind of like when Ryan Tannehill said, he wouldn't be here to kind of help out Malik Willis a few years ago. No, that went over well. But, it's interesting to me that is a way that Barry Trotz probably looks at it. And that's the kind of vibe I got from him, was the players he's brought in, all the younger guys kind of fit the mold for what they possibly could be with the guys that are veterans coming in. That's just the way that I see it. That might be what he was thinking in those signings, at least, Adam.
And I think just the fact that there are more players, right? Like you need to become a deeper team. Does acquiring Marner instead of those 3 players, I mean, does it make you a better team? It's a good question, because what's one thing that we've talked about at length about the Predators' weakness, or one of their weaknesses this past season, was they were by and large a one-line team. Now, the one line they had was one of the top lines in the league in terms of the number of goals scored when they were on the ice. I think there was only one line in the NHL who was on the ice for more goals for their team than the Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist combination, and that was the Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, Alexis Lafreniere combination with the New York Rangers. So one of the top scoring lines in the league was on the Predators. But after that, there was a huge drop-off. There wasn't that depth behind them in terms of scoring, like we've seen with the Dallas Stars, for example, who I think had 2 lines in that top 5 in terms of highest scoring lines. The top line with Robertson and Hintz and Pavelski, I believe it was, and the Mason Marchment, Matt Duchene, Tyler Seguin line. So
yep.
The Predators did not have that scoring balance. Now with 3 players, well, specifically 2 when we're talking about forwards, with those 2 forwards, you have the makings of a really good second line, assuming you start the season with Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Nyquist as that line. And look, there is going to be some regression. Like, do I expect Gus Nyquist to be as good as he was last year?
Hell
Probably not.
no.
Do I expect Brian O'Reilly to be as productive offensively as he was last season? Probably not. But you have more options now. And I think Marner, from a purely on ice standpoint, would have been a great addition, and he would have helped this team tremendously. He's good on both ends of the ice. He can facilitate. He's really good at breaking up plays defensively. Like I said, a Selke Trophy finalist last year. But I think it just feels like from afar that Marner would have gone sort of up against what Barry Trotz has prioritized in bringing in players,
Right.
which is a winning pedigree, which, as I said, Marner, just because he's been playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have not been able to get out of the first round, or actually they've been able to get out of the first round once, but beyond that,
yeah.
they have not been able to do that in the Austin Matthews era. I'm not sure he would have been a fit in that regard. So I do think the Predators, despite how big of a deal that would have been,
Mm-hmm.
I think they ultimately the right choice in getting the players they did without having to give up significant assets in
I
order
think
to
so.
do it. So
yeah, I mean, and one quick thing I would want to add is, if you do bring in Marner, the thing I was thinking of as well is, with him being 27, you've also got those guys down the pipeline. What does that do for the way you think about what you could have down the pipeline? It's okay. Yeah, we've got Marner, and then the older guys could, leave in a couple of seasons. Marner would also be hanging around longer than these other guys. And if you look at it that way, then you've got to go, oh, Zach LaRue's coming up, Joakim Kimmel's coming up, whoever they're drafting could possibly be coming up. Teddy Stiga looked pretty confident, honestly. He could be a guy that grows in a couple of years. How do some of these, moves, coincide with Barry Trotz thinking, if I add Marner, what does this do for years down the line? Obviously, good GMs think of that. You've got to be aware of those things. But that is probably one aspect that went into making that decision. And maybe Barry, speculating, saying, hey, Ryan, like, I'm thinking of our team long term here. We've got great pieces down the pipeline. Mitch is a great player. He's not the guy I'm looking for right now. So that could have been the way that the Predators were looking at it. Would he have made a big difference? Yes, no question. Just doesn't sound like it fits the mold for what Barry Trotz, or Big Swing Barry Trotz, was looking for.
we've set the expectations for the Predators based on what they've done this offseason. But what about the Titans? The Titans were busy too this offseason. They made plenty of big moves in free agency. They made a coaching change. A lot has happened with the Tennessee Titans, who are only a few weeks away from the start of training camp. And over the weekend, one NFL analyst offers his analysis on what a successful 2024 season would look like for the Titans. We'll get into that next. Adam Vingan and Nick Keys are in for Chase and Big Joe, ESPN 1025, 1063, The Game. Chase and Big Joe Show, brought to you by Omni Nashville Hotel, broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville Studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. I am definitely not Chase McCabe. I'm Adam Vingan. He's definitely not Joe Dubin. He's Nick Keyser.
But I am Dr. Crane, though.
But
he is here.
But Nick Frazier is here. He is the connective tissue between his usual show and those filling in. Chase is on vacation. Big Joe Dubin will be helping fill in for Jared this week. He's with Jill Jelnick today and tomorrow from 2 to 6. So listen in for that. And then I think it's me and him. I know it's me and him because otherwise I don't know. I know I have to know my own schedule, right? It's me and Joe. It's me and Big Joe from 2 to 6 on Wednesday and Thursday. Everyone's getting their vacations in now because it's almost Titans season. They report to training camp in a couple of weeks. There'll be a lot to talk about. So we spent a lot of time discussing the state of the Nashville Predators. But what about the state of the Tennessee Titans? And over the weekend, Adam Rank, who writes for NFL.com, got to the Titans in his State of the Franchise series. He wrote one of these articles for every team in the NFL. And he finally reached the Titans, I believe, on July 3rd. He got to the AFC. I think the AFC South may have been last but not least, which I think you could say about the AFC South in a lot of years.
Yeah, probably.
But he finally got to the Titans, and they break down the roster reshuffling, the new faces to know, the state of the quarterback room, all of those things. And at the bottom of the story, and every story, he has for 2024 to be a success, the insert team here must, and he gives 5 choices. A, win the Super Bowl. B, make a playoff run. C, earn a playoff berth. D, finish above 500. E, show progress. So according to Adam Rank of NFL.com, for 2024 to be a success for the Titans, they must E, show progress.
And is that shocking?
Which is the lowest bar. No, it's not. Rank writes, look, it feels a little steep to go into the season with playoff expectations. That's not to say Titans fans shouldn't dream of winning the AFC South, kind of like the Texans did last year. It can be done. But to me, that's just not a healthy expectation right now. A more realistic possibility is figuring out you have a new head coach who makes good decisions and a promising young quarterback who looks like he's going to stick at the NFL level. I would take that as a victory and move on to 2025. So according to Adam Rank, lowest bar possible for the Titans to clear in his rankings. All they have to do is show progress. And as you said, Nick, it's hard to argue with that when you consider the major changes that have been made, namely at head coach. No more Mike Vrabel, Brian Callahan in. He is the, as Jared likes to call them, the offensive guru, the quarterback guru. Now, I don't know if Brian Callahan likes skinny lattes or wears capri pants on the sidelines like Mike McDonald or anything like that.
Maybe.
He might, but he's going to be calling plays for the first time because he did not call plays with the Cincinnati Bengals. We know that Will Levis had, I would say, a promising half season.
I would say it was definitely acceptable.
Acceptable is a good word. He got off to a fantastic start, obviously, with 4 touchdowns against the Atlanta Falcons in Week 8. Great debut. Of course, led the comeback in Miami on Monday Night Football. But there was some growing pains for Will Levis, and understandably so. But he's getting in. He's going to be the full-time starter this year. He's going to be quarterback 1 from the start of the season. There's a lot of changes on the offense, especially at receiver with Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley. Questions about the offensive line.
Tons.
A lot of questions about the defense, in my opinion, as well. Not it feels like the defense has sort of taken the back seat to all the changes made on the offensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we make of the safety situation? What do we make of the linebacker situation? Pretty thin groups there, I would say, currently. Yeah. Now, there is still time for them to make some changes and signings before training camp, but the defense is a little thin, in my opinion. So is it fair? Is Adam Rank here on NFL.com, is he right on the money to just say the expectation for the Titans this year should just be make sure you have make sure you have a head coach who can call plays, make sure you have a quarterback who can execute those plays, and move on? Should that just be what we should expect for the Titans to be this year and be happy with that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And I thought that Rank asked a good question at the very end. But no, I think showing progress is a fair way to look at it. I had preseason ranking, or not preseason ranking, just when the regular season came out, Force Company, my weekend show, thought about this as well. We all went through and thought about what the schedule might look like. I picked them to finish the season 8-9. And what I would like to agree with out of these multiple choice options is I know I had them finish at 8-9, but I think my expectation for them to exceed or what they must do this year, even though I don't think they will, is finish above 500, Adam. I think that would be a fair way to look at this team improving. There's been a lot of hype, and I think it is definitely worthwhile to go, all right, Mr. Callahan, and I guess big Mr. Callahan, how much of a difference can you guys make this year in your first season? Albeit it's going to be a large mountain to climb for sure. That defense isn't the same without Kevin Byard. And look, the offensive line still has some questions. However, I don't know why Miami is paying Aaron Brewer, by the way. That just baffles me.
Not your problem anymore, Titans fans.
Nope. There are plenty of things that are not the Titans' problems anymore. I don't think Vrabel was a problem, but I think for this team this year, you have to be excited about it. I think an X factor for me, if they finish above 500, is Tony Pollard staying healthy. And obviously having back-to-back years of 1,000 rushing yards is a big deal for him, especially with a guy at his stature. But the running back committee, I think, will be a huge way to look at this team this year, because if Will Levis falls off even a little bit, Adam, I feel like they're going to have to lean on both of those guys. I mean, Haskins and also Pollard, like I mentioned, they've got to have big seasons. They've got to be the stalwarts back there. That's the way I look at it. If they finish above 500, that is true progress in my books.
I mean, preseason predictions, some of them are as worthless as toilet paper. I mean, toilet paper isn't worthless. I mean, you need toilet paper,
If
right?
you have
Everyone
two
needs some.
ply, two ply is where it's at.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
But
must.
I'm looking at the record projections from USA Today from last season in the AFC South. Yeah, they have the Jaguars winning the division at 10-7. This is last year, to emphasize. They had the
Right.
Jaguars winning at 10-7. The Titans in second at 8-9. The Texans at 5-12, and the Colts at 4-13. The Texans were 10-7. Now, nobody expected C.J. Stroud to have
No.
the season that he did, and his young receivers
So
to
out of
have-
left field.
Right. It was, and who's to say that the Titans? And I guess that's the question. Rank kind of touches on it a little bit in that response. I mean, who's to say that Will Levis can't come onto the scene like C.J. Stroud in his first full season as a starter, with Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd in the mix, and still having DeAndre Hopkins? I mean, remember before they signed Ridley. I mean, I think their second leading receiver in terms of receptions had to have been Chigakonkwo.
I believe it was.
after DeAndre Hopkins, and
Yep.
and Chigakonkwo wasn't the most sure-handed receiver last season. I bought into the Chigakonkwo hype this time last summer. I thought he was going to have a big season just based on what he was able to do in
Most of us did.
limited sample 2 seasons ago. But I think Rank is right on the money here. If the Titans finish, so you say, according to him, D finish above 500. That was your expectation.
Yes.
See, I think show progress is right on the money. If the Titans finish this season 7-10 and third place in the AFC South, but Will Levis looks like he can develop into that franchise quarterback, and Brian Callahan shows some good play calling chops, I think as a Titans fan, you can feel good about that. But it is an interesting question, because we did see last year in this division a team come out of nowhere, in the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans are a different story this year. For me, the Texans this year, I'm more confident in the Texans this year to meet preseason expectations than I was in the Jaguars last year.
That's fair to say.
Because the Texans, I mean, they had a good season. They add Stephon Diggs. They add Joe Mixon. They add, they bring back Dalton Schultz. This is just on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
And, the Jaguars, I say this all the time, because I trust the numbers. I'm big into the numbers. I want to know what the percentage chance was 2 seasons ago that the Jaguars would win enough games and the Titans would lose 7 in a row at the same time in order for the Jaguars to win the division. I would say the odds were minuscule.
Oh, I bet.
So, but I feel like the Texans actually showed something. I don't feel like it was a fluke that they were able to do this. So
no.
I guess the question is, are the Titans capable of that? And the reason why I'm hesitant to say that is, And this is something we've talked about on this station for years, is the state of the offensive line.
Yep.
I mean, as long as there are questions about that, can J.C. Latham make the transition? Can Bill Callahan coach these guys up in ways that he's coached up other players? I mean, I
Right.
feel like a lot of Titans fans, I don't want to say blind faith, but I feel like a lot of Titans fans are putting faith in Bill Callahan. Now that he's here, he'll get the offensive line
Right.
working. And I think he'll help, no doubt.
He will.
But I don't think they're going to go from one of the worst units in the league to even like league average just because of Bill Callahan. I still think you need to have the right players there. He can certainly coach them up.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what they do. 615-737-1025. According to NFL.com, for the 2024 to be a success, the Titans must just show progress, specifically Brian Callahan and Will Levis. Is that enough for you this coming season for the Titans, even if they have a losing record, even if they miss the playoffs? Is showing progress, specifically a head coach and quarterback, enough for you to feel good about this team? Let us know. Call us, YouTube chat us. We want to hear from you. Adam Bing and Nick Keyser in for Chase and Big Joe, 1025, 1063, The Game. The Chase and Big Joe Show brought to you by Omni Nashville Hotel. Adam Vingan, Nick Keyser in for Chase and Big Joe. Chase is on vacation. Big Joe will be on with Jill Jelnick from 2 to 6 today, filling in for Jared, who's also on vacation. Everybody taking their vacation now. It's that quiet time before the NFL season really gets going. The Titans start training camp in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
We're talking about the state of the Tennessee Titans as according to NFL.com. Adam Rank, one of their analysts, says that for the Titans to have a successful season, all they have to do is show progress. And during the break, Nick Frazier made a point to say he wanted to disagree with me about something, which is it's the lifeblood of sports talk radio is disagreement.
The fuel, the fire.
Yes. So Nick, the other Nick,
Yes.
tell me what problem you have with my take there.
Hit us, Dr. Crane.
You made
Dr.
a
Crane.
comment, excuse me, about a 7-10 season that's showing progress. If Brian Callahan shows some good signs of, play art, basically being good for the Titans this season, along with Will Levis showing signs of improvement. If the Titans go 7-10 with this wide receiver core, that just shows me that the Titans are going to be staying in the mucky middle. And it's like Marcus Mariota 2.0. That's how I've looked at it. Nick knows my comments about this type of take.
All too well.
I've mentioned it for the last month and a half or so. This is Marcus Mariota 2.0 if the Titans end up going 7-10. And now he talked about the preseason. What do I have the Titans at? What is their ceiling and low point? Low point for me is 7-10, but their high point is 10-7. So that's my little window there. As for Titans' sake, if Will Levis does come out and show signs of improvement, but not enough to be like the elite guy, but may fool the Titans front office, like this could be our guy of the future, and they go sign him to an extension deal type thing, because he's not a first rounder, he's a second rounder, so you don't have that 5th-year option. That's the issue. And so if you have that type of take, you're like, well, Will Levis could be the guy of the future, but do we want to spend that money?
Yeah, and you've talked about with Jake and I about how let's give Will Levis maybe a year or two to figure out if he's the guy. And I disagree with you guys. I said give him 2 or 3 years to see if he's your guy. And I think you have to, because of that wide receiver staff. And how can he ultimately be, a caveat to change that? Not a caveat, just a variable to kind of change that for the franchise, because we talked about how stagnant the franchise has been, Adam. And so you kind of have to think about that long-term wise. But I think Nick has a fair point as well to me earlier, saying that I think this team does have to finish above 500 to show true progress.
So how many wins, Nick Frazier, do you think the receiving core is worth on its own in terms of addition? They were 6-11 last year. So
Right.
7-10 would be showing progress because that's one more win.
Right.
You say the range for you is between 7-10 and 10-7. So how many wins do you think this new receiving core is worth to the Titans?
9.
Okay.
9 wins for this wide receiver core is what they should be getting. Now, here's the modern day NFL for me. This is just how I perceive the NFL. You're outscoring defenses. A lot of teams are not really prioritizing defenses as much as they used to. It's a quarterback-driven league. So you're going to have your playmakers on the outside. Sure, the run game's kind of been obsolete for the most part. Titans are kind of transitioning to a 2-back set. I mean, you had Derrick Henry for the long time, just running the ball majority of the time there. But this new NFL, this new style of NFL has turned out to be a more passing-first league. And so with that being said, you have a quarterback that has a cannon on his shoulder. You got to be able to throw the ball continuously, probably 90%, 80% of the game, instead of running the ball 80% of the game. That's how I just perceive the NFL.
Well, I hear your point, and my counterpoint would be that is, in order for Will Levis to get the ball to those receivers so that they can score touchdowns, outscore defenses, and win 9-10 games, Will Levis needs to be able to be standing upright for more than a few seconds.
Well, very true.
And that comes down to the offensive line. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, this receiving core is exciting when you consider just like what it looked like last year to what it's going to look like this year. Last year, it was DeAndre Hopkins and the DeAndre Hopkinettes, basically.
Yeah,
basically. No disrespect to Nick Westbrook-Akine, really solid player.
And then Chris Moore,
Kyle Phillips, Chigakonkwo. This year, you've got Calvin Ridley, you've got Tyler Boyd, you got proven receivers that can help DeAndre Hopkins spread the wealth. And you have Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears who can catch the ball out of the backfields, which Derrick Henry, that was not his strength as a player. But it's about keeping Will Levis upright. His numbers when pressured last year were not great. Now, it is a limited sample, but they were not great. And look, very few quarterbacks can look good behind an offensive line as porous as the one that the Tennessee Titans have been trotting out there for the last couple of years. Now, I'd like the addition of Lloyd Cushenberry. You're hoping for progress from Peter Skoronski. Who knows what's happening with Nicholas Petit-Frere, Frere, not Forere. If Rexroad heard that, he'd be very upset with me. Nicholas Petit-Frere, Dylan Radins. It all does come down to J.C. Latham. Like they pay the premium price for him, picking him as high as they did in the draft. And will he be able to make the transition to left tackle? They're really banking on it. So I hear what you're saying, Frazier. I'm just like that offensive line still gives the willies. Like it looks better on paper,
Yes.
but it still gives me the willies.
And I get that. But to your point,
Not Willie Donick, just the willies.
He'll be here at 11.
Yes.
To your second point, though, about bringing in Bill Callahan and maybe this could be a almost league average offensive line. I think they will be a league average offensive line. I think Bill Callahan, as an offensive line coach, has that capability and can bring out those intangibles of a player.
Mhm.
That's just the way I perceive how he's able to teach players. Because don't get me wrong, they're all young offensive linemen. There's always room for youth. There's always room for improvement. Now, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. There are no old dogs in this offensive line, so they're puppies. You can teach puppies new tricks. Am I right or wrong?
I mean,
you got a dog?
yeah.
I mean, I do have a 6-year-old dog, a 6 or 7-year-old
Is
dog.
he Pretzel?
It is Pretzel.
That's right. Yeah.
Pretzel doesn't know very many tricks.
Okay.
I mean,
when Pretzel was a puppy, did you get Pretzel some tricks?
I tried. It didn't always work out very well, but I tried. That's the point, is that Peter Skoronski is a puppy in the NFL. Now, Bill Callahan could teach him some tricks and maybe he'd grow into an adult dog. But, like my dog, he just kind of learned how to sit when food was present and then he just lays around, So
And that's all you need from an offensive line. This going up against defensive linemen in the NFL, if you're a puppy, quote unquote, in this
Sure.
situation, you got to find that inner dog in you. You got to be like D-May says, you got to find that dog in you.
Yeah.
And if all of those offensive linemen can find the dog in them, I mean, this is an average offensive line,
That's
which
true.
can get you 9 wins in the NFL.
And I mean, how quickly can they become Hercules?
There you
Like
go.
they've got.
now we're mixing metaphors here. We're going from dogs to Disney movies.
That's Sandlot, Hercules.
Hercules from Sandlot.
Wait. Okay. Sorry. When I think Hercules, I immediately think the Disney movie.
That's okay.
I'm
So,
with you, Adam.
so by the way, PFF, Pro Football Focus, had their rankings of every unit heading into the season. Offensive line rankings for the Tennessee Titans. 30 out of 32 for the Tennessee Titans. I mean, that's not a shock for anybody. Now, having an experienced center in Lloyd Cushenberry, who's actually the size of a center in the NFL, unlike Aaron Brewer, that helps. Having him next to Peter Skoronski, that helps. That right side is still a big question mark. Like, who's going to play right tackle for the Tennessee Titans? I'm not going to sit here and tell you the right tackle story because it's not my story to tell. It's Jared's story to tell. But if you listen to the station for any length of time, you've heard the right tackle story roughly 150,000 times.
And also heard PT.
Yes.
So
PT.
yeah.
That's a Jared and Ian thing.
Yes, it is.
So, but the who's playing right tackle? That's the question.
Mhm.
I mean, we'll find out in a couple weeks, I guess. We might not even find out in a couple weeks.
Maybe. I don't know. And could maybe John Ajokwu be a surprise story? We have no idea. But that story will continue to write itself. Us at 102.5 and other shows as well. And hey, maybe Lloyd will be able to be trustworthy, knowing, after seeing him in Nashville at the Preds game, handing off a catfish. But
I mean, he did.
You know.
He did get that catfish to Will
He
Levis
did,
pretty
yeah.
well. I mean,
He
it's
did.
not a catfish.
slimy.
Those are slimy,
Like snapping a ball in the rain, baby.
slimy creatures. But I mean, Aaron Brewer had trouble snapping the
Yeah.
ball to begin with.
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
Aaron Brewer's tougher than a $2 steak. Well, with Lloyd Cushenberry, you get steak.
Hey, there you
That's
go.
what you got.
Yeah.
Are we talking loaded baked potato too?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Good. I like mushrooms with my steak too. How do you guys feel
With the
about
bacon bits,
Yeah, I don't
can't
mind
go
it.
wrong with it.
that? Okay.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't mind it.
the Titans have expectations, just like the Predators have expectations. Titans' expectations are a little bit lower, as we've talked about, but there's still a lot to look forward to when the Titans kick off training camp here at the end of the month. But coming up next, we finally got some details about UC Saros's contract, which, of course, as we know, he signed an 8-year deal. It was 8 years, right?
Yep.
8-year contract with
Extension, yeah.
with a $7.74 million cap hit. Some of the details of that contract have been reported, and I think it could mean the end for a certain Predators player. We'll get into that next. Chase and Big Joe Show. Adam Ving and Nick Keyser, 102.5, 106.3, The Game.
All right, let's talk 5 Points Roofing. Now's a good time. Like, it's pretty right now. Now's a good time to get your roof checked out. They will come out there and give you a free inspection and then tell you what you need. 5pointsroofing.com. That's where you need to go to get started. If you were affected, your property was affected maybe a month or so ago by big storms that came through, your roof probably got some damage. So have them come out, look at it, and then if you do need repairs, they will walk you through the insurance claim process and make the process so much easier. 5pointsroofing.com, FIVE pointsroofing.com. You got to spell it out. 5pointsroofing.com. Go see them.
Well, we talked to his agent, and my job is to make sure that the Nashville Predators are in a position where, I've got to protect the organization for whatever I do. The number one is, we've always believed in you earn it, and Askey is a terrific prospect, and we know that. And I talked to his agent. I said, I'm going to do this. We're gonna sign Saros for long term. I need to find a goalie that can be a backup, just in case Askey is not quite ready. He's just 21. He's not even 22 years old. I don't believe yet. And everybody knows he's a good prospect, but goaltending is a unique position.
That was Barry Trotz on with Willie and D-Mace last week, talking about Yaroslav Askarov and what the re-signing of UC Saros means for Askarov. But before we get into that, Neil is on the line. Neil has a comment on the Nashville Predators. Go ahead, Neil.
How's it going?
Good. You?
Going well, thank you. First off, mushrooms with steak, no go. But other than that, I want to talk about, like Trotz was saying, Nashville is a destination city. It's coming clearer and clearer that, that Nashville is a destination city, and we're going to get people via that. Marner, no go. I think he's great, all that, but I don't think he's going to mesh with the culture that Trotz is trying to build there, which I kind of goes into Askarov, which I love him and all. And I love the whole tearing players down behind the net and all that. But like, I don't know that that's what Trotz is looking for either. But I think as far as like, I think Trotz might use the long-term injury reserve as well, kind of like Vegas and Tampa have in the past. We could look at that. And Glass and Fabio attach a pick, get rid of their contract money, and go on. I'll hang up and listen. And I appreciate you guys. I like both of you.
Oh, hey,
Yeah,
thanks, Neil. I
thank you, Neil.
appreciate that,
Yeah.
even if you don't like mushrooms on steak like I do. But
Lots
let's
to unpack there.
there's a lot to unpack there. Neil
It's-
clearly
it's
listening to the
good,
show
by the
today,
way.
which is great.
It's good, by the way, Adam.
Yeah.
Mushrooms on steak.
It is good. It is
Mhm.
good.
You prepared a certain way.
Yes.
Blue rare.
Yes. So let's talk about Askarov specifically,
Mhm.
because that's the player I was alluding to. Because over the weekend, some of the details of UC Saros's new 8-year contract, 8 years, $61.92 million contract to be exact, were revealed. I saw it on Cap Friendly, which is still active until the
Yeah.
Capitals tear it away from us because they're a bunch of jerks.
We have no idea when it's going to happen.
And Puckpedia, which I think is going to emerge, at least at first, as the successor to Cap Friendly.
Mhm.
But according to both sites, UC Saros has a full no movement clause in the first 6 years of his new contract.
Yep.
So from 2025-26 to 2030-2031, UC Saros has a full no movement clause in his contract. And if my math is right, at the end of the 2030-31 season, UC Saros will be 36 years old.
Mhm.
So they're not going to trade him this year. So I'm not counting that. But the first 6 years of his contract, basically until he's 36 years old, not basically, it is. UC Saros has full control over his situation.
Yep.
If the Predators are interested in trading UC Saros at any point in the first 6 years of his deal, he has to sign off on it. Now, the final 2 years of his deal, in the years 2031 and 2032, he has a modified no trade clause,
Mhm.
which, according to Cap Friendly, he submits a 15-team no trade list. But that's not until 2031, when Nick will be 20 years old, probably by that point. So 6 years with a full no movement clause. And this comes back to the conversation I've constantly had with Willie specifically, but also Robbie and Joe, everybody on the station. We had the Avengers. Remember, the Team Avengers were those who were on the side of UC Saros signing. The non-Avengers. I'm not a big Marvel guy. The bad guys in this situation were those of us who thought they should move on from Saros, including me. And my reason for that was the contractual timeline. It just doesn't line up. I mean, Yaroslav Askarov was a first-round pick in 2020. He has a tremendous pedigree. He's expected to be a top-notch NHL goaltender. And if UC Saros continues to play as well as he has, and if Pekka Rinne is any indication, he's going to play well, Saros is, until he's late 30s. There does not appear to be a spot for Yaroslav Askarov as a legitimate NHL starter for the foreseeable future.
No. And
it just, this no movement clause
Mhm.
furthers my position that they need to move on from Askarov sooner rather than later.
And I think that would be the ideal plan, right? Barry said in that clip that we played at the very beginning of the segment that he has spoken with Dan Milstein, who is his agent, by the way. So Dan is a pretty forthcoming guy, especially with his clients and being on social media. And I know that the way that he's handled them, he's done a pretty good job marketing, who he represents as well. They even had a showcase down in Florida, but that's besides the point. I think with Askarov, that dialogue is very important. And I know that Barry wouldn't necessarily share exactly what they had discussed, but I think for the time being, there is an understanding of what the plan is for the next 2 seasons, maybe 3, if I had to guess. And by the way, Askarov is due a contract next summer in 2025, by the way. So he'll be a restricted free agent. So he would still kind of be tied to Nashville for the next year after that. And I think that could become a unique situation where he could even be like Igor Afanasyev, who, the Preds traded for Ozzy Weisblatt. And then Igor has since said, I'm going back to Russia. So not to say that Yaroslav is going to do that, but if there is the proper opportunity for Askarov to go be a starter somewhere else, they will take it. And he'll do whichever way possible he can that makes the most sense, especially for himself. So we will find out pretty quickly. And I do agree with you, Adam, in the sense they need to figure this out and probably move him maybe before the season starts. But, it already sounds like the competition is at bay. They want this to happen between him and Scott Wedgwood. And so that's another aspect too of, wow, the Predators signed someone and they're telling him, we could basically go ahead and let you go if this guy beats you out of your job. So I find that very intriguing. And could the Predators ultimately want to have Askarov as a backup? Clearly there's interest, but does Askarov want that? And clearly there is frustration on his end, Adam, and I think he wants a new chance.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's still young. He's still unproven in terms of NHL experience. I mean, he's played, 2 full seasons in the American League?
3 NHL games, I think.
Right. And there's a lot of hype around Askarov. He's one of the top goalie prospects in the league, but this town ain't big enough for the two of them. It doesn't make sense to me to have Askarov hanging around while Saros likely will continue to be, the bell cow, so to speak, in net for the Predators. And now that we know, according to Cap Friendly and Puckpedia, that Saros has a full no movement clause for the first 6 years of his new contract, I just don't see where the upward mobility is for Yaroslav Askarov. And there was a report during the NHL draft from our friend Elliot Freeman that mentioned that Barry Trotz was getting a lot of calls on Askarov, and Barry has also said that as well since then. But the return that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Nick, the return that the Predators were looking for were a young NHL-ready player or a comparable prospect at another position.
Yes, that'd be right.
So they want like a very highly rated defensive prospect or a very highly rated forward prospect.
Mm-hmm.
On even ground to what Askarov is in terms of goalie prospects.
Yep.
And I think that's something that they should strongly consider. And Barry Trotz was here with Pekka Rinne. He knows how to play goalie for long periods of time. He trusts UC Saros. He's going to trust UC Saros just like he trusted, it seems like. And that's fine. I just think that you had to choose one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's either sign Saros long-term and trade Askarov, or trade Saros when there was a goaltending market and hit your wagon to Askarov, or sign a bridge starter to give Askarov an extra year or two, or a security blanket, or whatever you want to. It doesn't make sense for me for them to hold on to Askarov. And if I'm a Yaroslav Askarov, I'm strongly considering a change of scenery.
Absolutely. And he has all the reason to feel that way. And the Predators fans out there that understand this are thinking the same way as I do. Could the Predators, see a sense for both parties in the near future? They absolutely could. I mean, the way that Barry Trotz handled Ryan McDonagh already tells me enough. Not necessarily the same situation, but where Ryan goes and tells Barry, if there is an opportunity for me to go to X, please help me out here. And Barry will do the right thing. He will help that player out. I know I've heard that before. I think Willie may have touched on it. Ideally, the way I could think about it is, let's say that Askarov ends up being okay with another year in Milwaukee, gets a new contract. Maybe it's a 2-year deal, 1-year deal. Then he's the backup goalie in Nashville. And then you see it through with Saros a little bit longer. Maybe a deal doesn't happen for Askarov. Could, Askarov try to ride it out for 2-3 years, maybe 4, and think, maybe if I just outplay UC Saros, they'll just trade him, but there's no way of knowing if that's how they're thinking or not. And the Predators nor Askarov's, camp or him would even touch on that subject. 3 or 4 years down the line going, yeah, like let's trade him. But then what makes more sense is you just locked a guy up for 8 years. You're not going to trade him after 3 or 4 years. That just makes zero sense.
Well, they can't. I mean,
No,
that's the
they
point.
wouldn't,
They
no.
have no. Not only would they, because they just
Right.
made this commitment to him, but if he doesn't want to go anywhere,
He doesn't have to.
he's not going anywhere.
Right.
It's just they have a luxury at goaltender, and
Mhm.
I think it would be wise for them to use that luxury
Yep.
to improve their team in another area. But I want to hear Predators fans' thoughts on this. 615-737-1025. UC Saros, a full no movement clause in in the first 6 years of his 8-year contract. What does that mean? What should that mean for the future of Yaroslav Askarov in Nashville? We'll get to that next. Adam Mingan, Nick Keyser in for Chase and Big Joe. 1025-1063 The Game. Chase and Big Joe show. Adam Vingan, Nick Keyser, Nick Frazier. on 102.5, 106.3 The Game. We're talking about UC Saros and Yaroslav Askarov, specifically the news from over the weekend, according to Cap Friendly and Puckpedia, that UC Saros has a full no movement clause in the first 6 years of his new 8-year contract, which does not start this season, starts next season. We have a comment on the YouTube chat. Who's to say they don't cut UC's workload enough to have a split tandem with Askarov for a few years? With the cap going up, UC's contract will take less and less of a percentage of the cap, making it easier to move down the line. And I understand the point there. A lot of teams are going more to this, 1A, 1B model. You do not see very many goalies. I mean, remember the days when Pecorine would start 65, 67 games? You don't really see that anymore.
No, you do not.
Saros is an exception, and there are other exceptions. Connor Hellebuck is an exception. When Andrei Vasilevsky is healthy, he is an exception. Igor Shesterkin, I would consider an exception. But there are fewer of those goalies who start the 60, 65, 70 games. So it's important you have another goalie who can play 25, 30, 35 games. But I don't think Askarov is ready for that yet. And maybe, as the commenter points out, in a few years from now, the Predators can transition toward that model. But, I keep going back to the way that the contracts line up. If this had lined up the way that Saros' arrival in the NHL had lined up with Pecorine nearing the end of his career, it would be much better. And I always say this, that if the Predators would have if Barry Trotz could have gotten one of the other GMs at the top of the draft last year in Nashville to bite on moving down and getting Askarov in return, what was it? I think they were aiming at number 4.
Something like that. It was top 5.
Yeah, top 4 or 5. And Askarov was out there. If one of those general managers would have bitten on that deal, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, there's
but
no
think
way.
about all the content we wouldn't have had.
Right.
Because of the Askarov of it all.
It's been great. Yeah.
It has been. It really, we've seen the lines in the sand have been drawn on this station. The Saros camp versus I want to call it the anti-Saros camp, because we all like UC Saros, but it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think the one thing I come back to with Askarov, and I've made this analogy before. I believe it was the year the team won the President's Trophy, the 2017-18 season. I think that was the season that Eeli Tolvanen arrived on the scene late in that season.
Yep.
And there were rumors around that trade deadline that the Predators were willing to trade Eeli Tolvanen. And at that time, Tolvanen had taken Europe by storm, had great KHL seasons, played in the Olympics. I believe he played in the World Junior Championships as well. A lot of hype surrounding Eeli Tolvanen at that time. Think about the return the Predators could have gotten in exchange for Eeli Tolvanen when the hype was at its highest. Now, Tolvanen has settled into a middle 6, second line, third line guy, just signed a new contract with the Seattle Kraken, has fit in well there, but he has not lived up to what we thought he was going to be.
Nope.
Now, Askarov has more North American playing experience than Tolvanen did at that time, but there's still a lot of unrealized potential for Askarov. And if you're looking to move him, I think you should do it sooner rather than later so that you can sell other teams on that unrealized potential. Because if he continues to play and he turns out to be, fine, slightly above average, the return on your investment is not going to be that great.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's prudent for the Predators, if they're going to make a trade involving Askarov, to do it as soon as they possibly can. It doesn't seem like they're going to.
I don't think
but
so either.
I would if I were in Barry Trotz's shoes.
Last year, if the move had made sense, look at one team that was very, very interested in trying to get UC Saros, or at least a starting goaltender, was the New Jersey Devils. And not to say that would have been a perfect fit last season, Adam, but that is at least another team that needed a goalie, that acquired a goalie rather recently. And then also, too, not to say that this would have made sense either, but the Flames moved around their goaltenders. The Bruins have moved around their goaltenders now. So the market's been there for way too long for the Predators to have at least thought about the right move. It could have very well happened, but it didn't. That's the biggest thing here is we know after it not happening, the repercussions, they've still yet to be seen, but you could have gotten a huge return. Could it have been a draft pick and the Predators drafted another really good player possibly down the line? Absolutely, they could have gotten that. And Askarov, to me, is not going to be worth one pick straight up either, depending on what team it is. You've got to think about the longevity of what that goaltender has to offer. And I even think that Askarov still, and Adam, you can think differently if you want. I still don't think he's that much of a proven commodity. I mean,
No, he's played in the American League for a couple of
Right.
years and had some impressive stretches.
exactly.
But he's still a very young goalie who only has a handful of starts
Yes.
in the NHL in spot duty.
And it's very difficult to think about what makes complete sense for any organization because it's probably different by every team. I'm sure Barry Trotz gets very, very different offers from every single team that's interested in him. And he said late last week, he's going to be taking calls on him pretty frequently. So if something gets done, could it be before training camp? Right now, I highly doubt it after him saying that he wants to see the competition with Scott Wedgwood. Although, he has said things before and then things have changed very quickly. So, I think there could be that possibility for sure. It's been a fun conversation to have, especially with another hockey mind. But I truly do appreciate that there is just the transparency with the entire thing. It's what can we get for him? And, how do we feel about the playing with him? That's what I asked him at the press conference on free agency day was what's the plan here? And part of that, we can get to this even tomorrow, is the coaching staff that's here now. You have Mitch Korn's back, and they have a huge belief that he can make a difference. And then also what Pekka Rinne is able to do with him as well. So time will tell if it really pays off or not to have a tandem between those two or not, Adam. So we'll have to see at training camp if it's actually worth all the conversation.
And Mitch Korn, do not underestimate the return of Mitch Korn as director of goaltending. Korn, in many ways, I think Jared made this comparison, is the Bill Callahan of goaltenders.
I would even say he's bigger than that. Maybe.
Yeah, Mitch Korn has a fabulous track record. The number of goalies that he has helped develop, not just in Nashville, but he followed Barry Trotz to Washington and New York.
He coached Hasek too, right?
Yes, I believe he worked with Dominik Hasek in Buffalo. But, just in the past, 10 years or so, I was in Washington when Mitch Korn and Barry Trotz arrived, and he did wonders for Braden Holtby. He worked with Ilya Sorokin in New York, another really good goalie. And the hope is that Mitch Korn can work his magic on Yaroslav Askarov, and I think it will absolutely help. But I just, I think if the opportunity, like now that you see Saros is signed, to me, he was like your one big asset. Like if you're going to make a big change to your team, that's what it's going to be. Now I feel like Askarov has taken that role as the asset that can get you something. Like if they were able to get a young NHL ready player that they could put in their lineup as a result of trading Yaroslav Askarov,
You do it, absolutely.
or if they can get, a top forward or defensive prospect, I think you do it. I just think with Saros signed long term, you don't have questions about that as a goal, in terms of goaltender.
Mhm.
I just think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it seems like Askarov is here for at least the season, unless someone blows Barry Trotz away.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'll see what if Askarov does. Whether he challenges for the backup role against Scott Wedgwood, who I think is an underrated signing by the Predators, really solid backup goalie.
He is.
Or if he ends up going back to the American League, and we shall see. But we'll have to table that conversation until tomorrow. Nick Keyser, Nick Frazier, thank you for joining me today on the Chase and Big Joe show. Nick and I will be back, and the other Nick. We'll all be back tomorrow, 9 to 11 on 102.5 or 106.3 The Game. Willie and D-Mace coming up next.
See ya.